Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are so excited, as always, to be here with you. We are wrapping up our videos with some family wellness videos. So hopefully you're able to sit next to your parents or sit next to your child or whoever, a child that's in your home to talk about our next few videos. This one is specifically about talking to each other. And just to introduce myself, just in case this is your first video that you're watching of ours, my name is Stephanie McGarry, and I am a licensed counselor and a registered play therapist in Dallas, Texas.
And my name is Tara Becker. I am a licensed master social worker, also here in Dallas, Texas. And Steph and I provide these videos for families to talk about all sorts of different things. And this is really our first one having adolescents and parents or caregivers together. So this is an exciting one for us.
Yes, it is. So before we get started, we're talking about listening. We're talking about the importance of talking to each other. We want to put you in a space to where you're able to listen to us. And so Tara's going to walk you through a grounding exercise.
Yeah, and so this is something that we're going to use today, like Steph said, to get focused, but you can use it anytime. Like maybe if you're feeling overwhelmed, or if you're in school and you notice your mind is wandering, or if you're at work, your mind is wandering and you want to come back to the present moment. So go ahead and find just a comfortable position for your body to be. If it feels right, you can take a deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And we're just going to begin by noticing 5 things in the room that we can see. So take a look at the room around you. I'll give you an example. I can notice this bright lamp that's hanging above Steph and I. I notice a picture frame on the wall and a plant in the corner. So take a look around your space and notice 5 things that you can see. Now we're going to use our sense of hearing. So paying close attention, see if you can notice 4 things that you can hear in your environment. So Steph and I are sitting in a coffee shop and I can notice the voices of people talking. And I have to kind of pay pretty close attention to see what else I can notice.
I hear a little music.
Oh, music. I can hear Steph sitting next to me, so I can hear him breathing. See what you can hear. Next is my favorite one for grounding. You're going to find 3 things that you can touch. So I can touch the smooth table in front of us, can touch my jeans that I'm wearing that are a little rough, can touch the cool metal of the chair that I'm sitting in. See if you can find 3 things that you can touch. And today we're just going to do one more. So 2 things that you can smell. This one can be tricky too. Maybe if you're at home, you can smell food from breakfast or lunch. Maybe you can smell perfume if someone in your home wears perfume, or maybe you can smell, I can smell this cup of tea that I have in front of me. If you do happen to have a beverage or a snack with you, you're welcome to do the last one, which is something that you can taste. And this is just a way we can bring ourselves into the present moment, focus on what's around us. If it helps, you can also say something like, I'm here in this moment, I'm safe. There's nowhere else I need to be right now. Thanks for trying that out with us.
All right. Thank you, Tara.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Today, we're talking again about talking to each other, and we're going to use the word communication. And just so we're on the same page, we're going to just break down 3 components to communication so that we know what we're talking about as we move along today. The first one is always remembering that communication is a 2-way process. There's two people involved, sometimes more, but there's someone who's speaking, and then typically there's someone who is listening.
Yeah.
And so there's a speaking part going on, and then there's a listening part. It's almost like a dance, right? We're speaking, listening. So it's a two-way process. Today, we're going to be focused a lot on the person who's doing the listening, but there is a responsibility of the person speaking.
Yeah.
Too.
And I don't even know if we said this, but one of the reasons we wanted to start with this topic is because communication is, it seems simple when you're laying this out, but communication is so hard.
Yes.
Especially within our families, within our friendships, romantic relationships. Communication really is the foundation of what helps our relationships be positive and healthy, or if they can be unhealthy. And so even as you were talking, I was like, oh, it just seems so easy, but we know that this is so challenging. And that's why we picked this as like our first thing, is helping each other to communicate better.
Yes. And it's hard to especially communicate with people that you're the closest to.
Yes.
Like your child or your caregiver or, your partner.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a two-way process. It can also be both verbal and nonverbal, right? So we'll talk a little bit more about, so for example, I'm verbally communicating, but I can also communicate to you with my body posture. So we'll talk about that too. And then lastly, communication involves the exchange of information.
Yeah.
Usually you're trying to tell somebody something or you're asking something, but it's some information that we're trying to get from one end to the other end, from the speaker to the listener. Yeah. All right. So because Tara, communication is so hard, we want to talk about some things that really help. And you've probably heard of these things before, but it never hurts to be reminded of them because we're constantly practicing. Yeah. So the first one is active listening. We're going to break down these in a few slides, but we just want to touch on them before we get there. The first one is active listening. And so active listening is a set of techniques that help you become an engaged listener. We're going to break that down a little more, but it's something where you are using lots of things to make sure that you are paying attention to the person speaking. We're also going to talk about empathy. When you're communicating to someone, you want the person that you're communicating to you to understand what you're saying. You want to feel felt and you want to feel heard. So we're going to break that down. And then lastly, we're going to look at assuming the good when someone's communicating to you, especially if it's a hard conversation, whether it's conflict or for parent-child relationships, if it's a disciplined conversation. We want to talk about what it looks like to assume the good in conversation.
Again, all this harder than it sounds.
Yeah. Way harder than it sounds. If you've seen our previous videos, then we talked about empathy quite a bit. We've talked about how it communicates to someone that you see them, you hear them. It doesn't necessarily mean that you agree with what they're saying. You don't have to agree or like what they're saying. But empathy can sometimes just basically mean, if I were in that position, I can see how you would feel that way. It's in our videos, we explained it's looking out the other person's window and saying, I understand. I hear you, I see you. And even if you haven't been in that exact same position, when you're communicating, you want to be able to show empathy. In those videos, we talked about some sentence stems that you can use to show that you are listening and that you are being empathetic in the moment. For example, I can see that your face is really angry, so I can tell that made you upset. That's empathy. And parents, let me give you a key for your teenagers. You know that you're hitting the empathy button when they say, exactly, or yes, or I even had a kid tell me, you get it, right? I had never been through what they were talking about, but that empathetic listening of reflecting, so even said, oh, that really frustrated you. It did. That's the empathy piece. That's how you know you hit that. So empathy is a huge part of communication because we want the other person to know that we're not just listening just to listen, but we really want to hear what they're saying and understand from them how they're feeling. during that process.
Yeah, and empathy is something that adolescents and teens can show for their parents too.
Yes.
So it
Yes.
can be really hard sometimes to take the perspective of your parent, especially in those conversations. But sometimes it can allow us to move through those challenges easier when we can kind of try to understand where the other person's coming from.
Yes, for
Yeah.
example,
Yeah.
when parents let teenagers know, I was a teenager too.
Yeah.
Right? I've been 16 before, I've been 12, I've been 13, even though times have changed quite a bit, some things are still the same. So as a teenager, I'm an adolescent, it's, having that empathy for parents too. All right, so let's dive into active listening. So of course, there's active, but there's also passive listening. So we're going to talk about what it looks like to actively listen, to prepare your mind, your body, to really be in the same space as the other person as they're preparing to share something with you. Now, before we jump into these 4 things, these are not set in stone.
Yeah.
Some people, it works really well, some people it doesn't, but it never hurts to ask, right? So like for this first one, for example, give eye contact. So when you are communicating to your child or when you're communicating to your parent or your caregiver, you want to show them that you're listening by looking at them. I hear what you're saying. But for some people, they don't really need eye contact. I've even had people say, why are you looking at me?
That's freaking out. Culturally, it could be different too.
Exactly.
So it depends.
It depends. And you can actually say, I've asked this question before. Now, do you need me to look at you while I'm saying this or not? But at the beginning, you ask, you get to know, you observe. If I'm looking at the other person and they look away, maybe that's communicating that the eye contact may be something different. I can look away too in conversation. But a good rule of thumb is to at least try to make a few touch points of eye contact. Because that also helps you as the listener make sure that you're hearing what it is they're trying to tell you. All right, so again, that 2-way process. We want to give eye contact to show that we're listening, as well as to make sure that we're hearing what they want, what they're trying to say, either verbally or non-verbally, which takes us to our second one. Active listening involves checking your body posture, right? As therapists, we learn about leaning in physically. So when someone's talking, kind of physically leaning in because I really want to hear. And for me, it's very hard. I get distracted very easily. So I lean in to help me. You're paying attention in this moment, Stephanie. Or checking your body posture to see if it's bringing the person more into the conversation, right? Am I looking, checking your facial expressions? We're family. And so sometimes I'll say, now I know my face is saying this, but I'm listening. I hear you. Or if you're open, even with your chest, or you're just kind of like, because this can communicate, could you please hurry up talking?
Or parents like, I'm here to listen to you, but your body posture is saying something different.
Right.
Like, I've already decided.
Exactly. Oh, so exactly. Right. Because a lot of times we listen to respond or react instead of to actually listen to say, okay, let me see what it is you're saying. So checking your body posture, and also when you're doing the eye contact, looking at the body posture of the person who's talking, because that could tell you a lot about what they're saying too. And you can say, I can tell your shoulders just drooped a little bit. That ties right back into that empathy piece. All right, so we have some eye contact. We're making sure our body posture is leaning in. And then we also want to ask questions. This is also a tricky one. Because you don't want to pepper people with too many questions, because then they'll say, are you not listening?
Or that's not important to how I feel right now.
So you want to be able to make sure you're asking genuine questions. You want to dig a little deeper and say, so tell me more about how that made you feel, or let me make sure I got this right. This happened, and then this happened. So you want to check for understanding, ask those clarifying questions. But again, active listening communication is a dance. So look at the person's body posture to see, am I asking too many questions, or are they wanting me to ask questions? So that third one, just make sure it shows that you are paying attention and you're listening. Now, this last one is hard for me.
So hard for me.
And I'm sure a lot of teens have shared with me, even in therapy, that it's hard for them too, because a lot of stuff happens out of habit.
Yes.
And that's avoiding distractions when someone's talking to
Yeah.
you. So whether it be your cell phone or the television,
Yeah.
again, we feel like we can do two things at once, but if you're distracted by your phone, either the phone is getting more attention or the person talking is getting more attention. So sometimes it's about physically, okay, let me put it down.
Yeah.
Going back to step one, let me make sure I'm giving eye contact, because we want to communicate verbally and non-verbally to the person speaking that I hear you. And sometimes when you're distracted on your phone, again, you're focused, or the TV, that you can't hear. And so you're saying, what did you say?
Mm-hmm.
Can you say that again? I missed it. And then for the person speaking, it's like,
Frustrating.
it'd be super frustrating.
Yes. I'll tell you a new one for me, like throwing my husband under the bus, my husband and partner, but my pet peeve right now is he has AirPods. And so he'll have an AirPod in and maybe the phone in his hand, but he'll say, I'm listening to you. But like all my brain can focus on is that I don't really believe him because like maybe he's listening to something and just giving me attention for the moment. And I really want that full undivided attention when we're talking about something that's important. So just being aware of all your tech and how you can show up fully.
And you brought up a good point, Tara, because again, we're talking about the two-way process. We're focused on the listener, but even for the person who's speaking to say, hey, can you take your AirPod out for a second? I know you're not listening to anything, but like
it's distracting
it's distracting me. To be able to say that, and for the other person to say, oh, yeah, they probably forgot because they feel so natural. So these are those 4 components to active listening. So we talked about empathy, we've talked about active listening, and Tara's going to take us into our next one of assuming the good.
Oh, this one is so important. Again, it seems easy, but I want you to think about like when your parent has done something or when your kiddo has done something. Sometimes, especially in families, we feel like we know each other so well that we already know exactly why the person did what they did. And so assuming the good is kind of this reminder to pause and say, you know what, I don't actually know the full story. And I'm sure the other person thought that they were doing the right thing or the best thing in the moment. And so giving, the other person that grace before you start having a conversation or communicating with them can really change the whole tone of your interaction. So assuming the good, just kind of, if you can like plant that in your head for your next hard conversation, like, am I going into this with that in mind? It can be really like a game changer.
Can be helpful. It can shift your perspective and then kind of, again, remind you, let me listen. Let me get some eye contact. Let me hear specifically about what's happening right now in this moment.
And let me hear the story from the other person before I make a judgment or before I think I know what happened. And sometimes we're right. But you want to kind of, like Steph was saying, it shifts your perspective and you have a conversation or communicate in a different way. Because really, even though we do make mistakes and mess up, parents and adolescents, we're often just trying our best and doing the best that we can. All right, so we've talked about a lot of the things that can help communication go well. And you might have even heard Steph and I kind of laughing over some of the mistakes that we made, and that's because they're so common and prevalent. Everyone makes them. And we're going to talk about some other mistakes that we make when we're talking to people, especially people that we love and that we're close to. So these are called the 4 horsemen. It's just a really intense name. But Dr. John Gottman came up with these 4 patterns of communication that can really hurt relationships. And they're really unhealthy ways that we often talk with each other. So the first one is criticism. Criticism, we attack the person instead of the problem. And in the next slide, I'm going to go through some examples of each of these and how we can do them differently, but we'll just kind of get on the same page. Contempt. Contempt is an attitude of disgust or anger. So think about when you're talking to someone, maybe you're like rolling your eyes at them, or you're just feeling like that person just doesn't understand you in any way, and you really don't like them in that moment. That's a feeling of contempt. Defensiveness is sometimes how we feel when we receive criticism. So when someone criticizes us, we get defensive and we try to turn the blame on the other person. And then stonewalling. This one happens so frequently, and it's when we just shut down and it's the silent treatment. We just refuse to engage in communication anymore. And we know that means things can't get better if we're not engaging with each other and trying to figure it out. So let's look at what this can look like. So this image has the 4 horsemen that we just talked about and their antidotes. So we're going to start with criticism. So the first one I want you to, all right, teens, I'm going to throw you under the bus for the first one. So we're going to imagine that you were supposed to be home at 10 and you came home at 11. Okay, so this is the scenario. So criticism would be if your caregiver, came up to you in that moment and said, like, you never think of anyone but yourself. Like, you don't know how worried I was. You don't understand what it's like to be a parent. And you just can't, you're just a bad kid for always being selfish. All right, that's pretty intense. We know that can come out in a lot of different kind of ways and different language, but they're attacking who you are instead of addressing the problem. Yeah. And it's easy to do because we get caught up in our emotions. So a different way to address that, and parents, I know you're gonna like take a deep breath, regulate. But saying something like, we agreed you'd be home at 10. I felt really worried and upset when you weren't home because I wasn't sure what happened. So the antidote to criticism is called a gentle startup. So with a gentle startup, you're going to express like what your need is, and you're going to use I statements. So you've probably heard that before. It might seem kind of silly, but it really can help when you speak about your feelings, your perspective, instead of using you. Anytime you're going down that you road, you did this, you are this, it's a bad way to go. Yeah. So this is just a little bit of a way that you can kind of evaluate how you're communicating with each other and see if you can shift it to result in a healthier conversation. All right, and let's go to contempt. So this one we're gonna throw the parents under. So let's say that a parent misses an important event. So let's say you had a basketball game and your parent didn't come. They said they were going to and they missed it. After the game, you come home and you say like, you're the worst dad ever. You never show up for anything. Like, I hate you. Like, you never show up for me. So instead of just in that moment, you've completely trash their character, right? You don't think well of them at all. And that can be hard on both sides. Yeah. And so the antidote for contempt is really building a culture of appreciation. So it's about that moment, but it's about other times as well. So maybe dad hasn't missed all the games, or maybe he does take care of you in different ways. Maybe he had to work late, whatever the situation is, kind of appreciating what he does do. And then again, using your I statements to share your needs. So I appreciate everything you do for me. I know you had to work late, but I felt really hurt that you didn't make it to this game.
Yeah, I can see that really connecting with the assuming the good.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
So really saying, going along with your example of, I know he or she really wanted to be there.
Yes.
And missed it. So I'm going to assume that they really tried to be there for me and something got in the way. Again, that shifts your perspective from that black or white thinking.
Yeah.
They're always like,
or all or nothing. Yeah. Never there could be the worst. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Those tie so well together. And, there are situations where, you might be thinking that, like you said, like thinking the good, but it's still important to communicate how you felt. Yeah. So letting that parent know, like, I know that this was out of your control, but it still really hurt my feelings. It's important to kind of share that. Otherwise, keeping it inside, it can kind of bottle up and make you feel bad. And make contempt worse. All right, so let's talk about defensiveness. So this again is a response to criticism. So when someone else maybe says something to you, you feel defensive. So again, let's use our parents. Let's say you really needed a supply for a project and you asked a parent, your dad, we're talking about dad, asked dad to pick it up and he forgot. And then dad in that moment might say well, you should have reminded me. You're always asking me for things. But in that moment, instead, a way that the antidote is take responsibility. So we might say like, you know what? You're right. I forgot to pick it up for you. I should have written it down. But at any moment where we're feeling like someone doesn't think the best of us, it can just be that automatic reaction that we want to defend ourselves. So it can be hard to take responsibility in the moment. All right, the last one, stonewalling. So we'll just throw everybody under the bus for this. Silent treatment, we can all go into this space of like, I just can't even talk to you. Sometimes there are things that we need to take care of in life, but then sometimes we could use those as excuses, like I can't talk to you because I have to do this, but really in the moment, that might not be true. We're just using it as a wall. So what do we do when we're feeling that intense? One antidote to that is psychological self-soothing. So this might be moving your body, getting some exercise, taking a walk, taking a breath, listening to some music. The important thing here is if you can find the words to share with the other person that you need some time, like, hey, I want to talk to you about this, but I need some space first. So parents or teens, you can both say that.
Yes.
Everybody gets to take some space sometimes so that they can regulate their bodies and be in the best space that they can. Now you can't leave it on forever.
Right. Gotta come back to it.
Yeah. So maybe you need like, hey, can we talk about this in 30 minutes after dinner, tomorrow morning? But it can't be like, I need space and then I'm never coming back around.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about what makes this so hard is we haven't talked about the brain in a couple of videos, but a lot of these things, criticism, contempt, stonewalling, defensiveness, that's our brains and body's reaction to us feeling triggered by something, right? So we know when we feel triggered by something, we usually kind of fight, flight, or freeze, right? And so that stonewalling can be a freeze. And so being able to psychologically self-soothe and say, you know what, I need a moment. You're reminding your brain and body, I'm in a safe place. I got a little upset. I need to breathe so I can come back to the conversation. That defensiveness is that fight, right? I want to kind of get, and we do it, right? It's a rupture. Sometimes we rupture relationships, but we can always repair it and say, I was really angry. I got super defensive when you said that because I really did try my best to do that. And it hurt my feelings, but I am going to take responsibility. So knowing that a lot of these things aren't things we are trying to do. I'm not trying to be critical, or I'm not trying to stonewall. Sometimes it's just our natural human behavioral response when we are triggered by an emotion, or if we feel like we're not being listened to or heard.
So our kind of goal in bringing these up is to just bring them into our awareness, knowing that they're things that we all do, hearing them. Next time you have a conversation and you're like, oh, I'm doing that thing right now that they talked about. What was the thing I was supposed to do instead? Trying to remember that so that you can kind of pivot in the moment. Or you need to go back and say, you know what? I realized in our conversation, I did this. I didn't mean to do that. Like, I'm going to try to do this next time. Like, just knowing it's going to happen.
It's natural.
So we've said throughout this, we know that communication between parents and caregivers and teens is hard. We always try to bring the voices of the folks that we're talking about into this space. And so we have a video for you with the voices of teens that you all can watch together. Is there anything else you want to say about this? Okay.
I feel weird and awkward. I feel like that's just normal now that I'm a teenager.
This is a hard time we're going through. We're growing, we're changing.
There's obviously a lot of awesome aspects, but
I feel like school is one of the biggest challenges.
It's like really stressful trying to get good grades because I want to make my parents happy and my teachers happy. So it's like focusing on other people.
It's like you're never gonna be good enough unless you only get A's. And if you get a B, well then there goes your chances of life and being in college.
I've lost all motivation, to be honest.
you know, I wanted to be friends with the popular kids so I can go to the good parties.
When you see other people hanging out without you or doing something that you want to be doing, it's like, why can't I be there? Did they not invite me? Am I not good enough?
We get so caught up in like what other people think about us.
Why act some way that I'm not in order to impress people that I don't like?
I want to be accepted for who I am.
I compare myself to others, which I think is very unhealthy. Oh, well, I don't look like this girl, I don't look like this person, and like, we have different body shapes. I have pimples and they don't. It makes me feel like I'm not good enough.
I kind of hate to admit this, but it does kind of give me satisfaction when I see that I have over a certain amount of views or over a certain amount of likes.
It's like super addicting. I'll sit there and I'll scroll there for hours and just do nothing and be super unproductive, which is terrible. I hate that.
People can be mean sometimes if it's a certain person that has a certain power amount of following or that's really, you think is really cool, and they say something bad about you. It would really hurt your feelings.
Teenagers are definitely, they're mean.
When I'm bullied, it makes me feel sad, maybe depressed even.
I've always been on